Oh, excellent. Okay, well, I will call this meeting of the Taos Academy Governing Council to order at 5:02 p.m. Can I please have a roll call vote? Or I'm sorry, a roll call to ascertain quorum. Ha ha ha.
Sam,
Here.
Laura,
Here.
Martin,
Here.
Barbara,
Absent.
Karen, here. You have a quorum.
We have ascertained our quorum. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is the approval of our agenda for this special meeting on May 21st, 2026. May I have a motion to approve this agenda?
So
Motion
moved.
to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Karen and a second by Martin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next is the approval of our draft minutes from our regular meeting scheduled from May 11th, 2026. We did have some changes earlier, but those are made, I believe.
Yes.
I'll motion to approve as amended.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next is public comment. If we have members of the public who would wish to speak, you may raise your hand. You will be given 2 minutes to speak. The only thing I'd like to add is that public comment is a time for you to address the board, but we may not address you at this time. Seeing no comments, we will move to the big business of the evening, which is our community question and answer with the finalist for the head administrator for Taos Academy for school year 26-27. To be clear, this is a 30-minute question and answer session featuring questions submitted in advance by Taos Academy parents, staff, and governing council members. We have compiled all those questions, and the Governing Council will ask the questions on behalf of stakeholder groups. And tonight, our finalist here is Dr. Denisha Moodley. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
And so, Denisha, you've received these questions in advance, so you've seen them. And if you don't mind, I will go ahead and start.
All right, perfect.
Okay, cool. So, Dr. Moodley, where do you believe Taos Academy is now, and where do you see it going in the next 3 to 5 years?
So when I received this question, I really reflected on my experience in both in-person and online schools. And really, both systems separately have strong components to them, but those components aren't strong for all kids, and there are gaps in those components. And then I really reflected and I had to narrow it down to, the gaps that I really wanted to highlight here. In-person interventions. Some kids who are going online need in-person interventions to support their learning and even their behavioral needs. And many kids have to go back to brick and mortar from online schools to get this. TA offers the best of both worlds by making sure that they can access the online curriculum, but also gain access to those in-person interventions when they need to do so. Another piece that I consider with online schools is that they diminish the ability for students to really engage with the experiences they need to build social skills, emotional intelligence, and even the non-digital soft skills that they need to be successful. Once again, we address that gap at TA by making sure that students have access to these learning opportunities through our enrichment classes, career prep classes, 21st century classes, our STEM classes, theater, music, the list goes on. We really do bridge that gap as well. And then I went to in person, and those gaps were a little easier to find for me because I've spent most of my time in person settings. Um, a lot of our kids are looking for experience, whether it be work experience that can allow them to gain occupational skills, or just an occupation so that they can support their families financially. Our students are also looking for venues where they are able to engage with extracurricular activities that fall outside of the activities that are sanctioned in school districts. And what happens in in-person settings is that when they go out of the traditional avenues that are held in the school district, there's a conflict, and they're having to pick between pursuing a passion that could enrich them and help them explore themselves, um, versus getting the credits they need to graduate. And at TA, once again, we do a strong job of allowing both of these very important worlds to exist for our kids. And then there's the one that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, but it is a reality. It's learning loss. Teachers are human beings. Every time they get sick, they're going to go on leave. They have lives, they have families, and they have a right to leave. And when that happens, students in traditional settings are not being exposed to explicit instruction. Teachers go on FMLA. Again, another cause for learning loss. And then in a traditional setting, teachers are responsible not just for facilitating high quality instruction, they're responsible for supervising kids, for redirecting behaviors. And in that process, what's being diminished? It's that high quality instruction. TA addresses these gaps by implementing and supporting this digital curriculum with pre-recorded explicit instruction. And the final piece that I really wanted to highlight is how we at TA really support high quality instruction through ensuring our teachers have enough time to plan. Traditional schools are averaging about 225 minutes of instruction a week. We have about 420 minutes. That's double the time. So, why am I bringing up all these gaps? It's because TA right now, which is leaning back to your question, is really capitalizing on the best of both worlds. All the strengths of in-person education, all the strengths of virtual education, but we're doing it better because our founders had such foresight in the making of the school that we're actually bridging the gaps that exist. So whereas in-person school and online school that function independently are allowing for kids to fall through those gaps and drop out or have lower outcomes, we really are holding kids in our building and pushing them forward. The second part of this question was where I see the school in 3 to 5 years. A vision for me in my educational philosophy is one that is collective. An effective vision is not one that's constructed with one lens. So, as much as I like to say I want a cosmetology class and augmented reality room, that is something that we really as a community have to come together and develop. What I will speak to in terms of a vision is my role as a leader in guiding that process and making sure it's happening. And I think in order for that to happen, one of the things I would need to make sure I do is facilitate ample platforms so that community members have input to drive that vision. Also, to make sure that as a school, we have systems where we're collecting data that's valid and meaningful so that our vision isn't just based on how we feel, it's based on data, it's grounded in data. And then another piece that I would ensure with a vision is making sure that whatever we choose, we set indicators as a team to hold myself accountable as well as other stakeholders so that we know we're doing our due diligence in driving that vision forward.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful response. Our next question is, how would you build a healthy school culture where students, staff, and families feel supported? And what would you do to keep staff morale high, prevent burnout, and navigate conflict professionally?
Okay, so I don't know if it was the word healthy in this question that just took me to my experience in science. And made me analogize school culture with the process of homeostasis. Um, when our body is too cold, we have muscle movement through shivering to produce heat. And when our body's too hot, we sweat to cool down. I think any leader who comes in and says that they have a specific strategy that can shift school culture to being positive and keep it there either isn't getting accurate data on their school culture or is being dishonest, because school culture is something that fluctuates. It's based on things that are inevitable. Communities experience loss. Communities experience differences. Communities experience growing pains, you know. And so as we go through those experiences, culture loses balance. It shifts from being positive to being in a process of regaining positivity. And I think that one of the ways we do our best to ensure that we're addressing school culture, one of the base practices is keeping a pulse on our schools. And as a leader, that means not just being visible in classrooms, in the lunchroom, but being observant and really engaging with all stakeholders to get a feel for where everyone is at. Um, to address school culture means we have to be very specific in what we're addressing. And so, for the purposes of this question, I'll just give some base practices that I engage with. And that is making sure that students have opportunities to enjoy learning, but also enjoy being children. Um, in terms of school culture and staff, making sure that all staff are acknowledged for their efforts in the learning community. But more so than that, making sure that all staff are embraced for the people that they are beyond just their roles as educators. We have staff members who are dancers. We have staff members who collect sneakers. We have staff members who are pickleball players and artists, and staff members who run their own line of herbal natural home remedies. So getting to know staff members and really embracing who they are as people, just like we would with children. And that brings me to another piece of school culture, and that's extending what we tell teachers to do for students, extending that to teachers, not just looking at a teacher as a professional, but really as a whole. And in order for us to do that, we also need to acknowledge the physical strain that comes with our occupation. We're in a very elite occupation pool where we have to service 15 plus people all at one time, and do it with continuous evaluation and considering not just their content proficiency, but also their emotional well being. That comes with a lot of physical strain, and making sure I'm intentional about setting up opportunities for teachers to rebalance physiologically. I've done this in previous schools where we've had sound therapy, ear seeding, we've had a doctor of Chinese medicine come and show us how to produce different herbal teas depending on our needs at the end of the day. And it's been very successful. I've had positive results from that. In terms of teacher burnout, one of the base things that I would do without knowing the specific root cause of what this burnout is, I'm going to generalize and say that a lot of teachers have to go through with additional tasks being added to their plate. And I think one way I can address teacher burnout is by making sure that if there's a need in our community and a task needs to be added, we make sure it's done in a sustainable way. And the way we do that is by either taking something off their plate that isn't a priority anymore. We share the load with teachers. We have a very large leadership team. We share that load with teachers, or we scaffold the task. So we're not giving teachers one big new additional task all at once, and we're really breaking it for them, and prioritizing the most important part of the strategy to be first. And then I believe you asked about conflict resolution. So in my time as an administrator, I've learned that conflict really comes in different tiers. Tier 3 is conflict that goes against our professional code that's outlined in our board policies. And Tier 3 is very specific in terms of a resolution and follow through. There are specific procedures in the board policy that will tell us, depending on the conflict, how to move forward. The next tier is Tier 2, and this tier is one where I would take more of a restorative approach. It would be specific based on the individual and the situation. I would have to consider the individual's mental state, their communication style, and what their comfort is in terms of reaching the ideal goal of conflict resolution, which is mediation and developing a solution to move forward. And then the final piece for conflict resolution would be Tier 1. And this, for me, is the most important one, because this is how we stop any escalated conflict from existing in our schools. And it's something very simple. It goes back to being proactive and present and gaining a pulse for the school. Figuring out if someone is having a bad day through nonverbal or verbal mannerisms, and then addressing that, again, differentiating the way I address it based on the person. These strategies would not work in a large school, but our school is small enough to where we know all of our kids and we know all of our staff. It's important to make sure we address this with an individual before internal conflict becomes external conflict and self-conflict becomes shared conflict. So that is what I would consider Tier 1 conflict, and how I would deal with that.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, how will you ensure a more inclusive atmosphere for Black and biracial students, particularly given TA's currently small population of these students?
So culturally relevant pedagogy is something that I base a lot of my practice with, especially since majority of my experience is serving marginalized populations. What I would say, grounding myself in that CLR framework, is that we can't be too quick to address feelings of exclusion with race. And it really is proven that the easiest and the fastest way that human beings categorize other human beings is through race. I'm not trying to deviate from the question. I really am being honest when I say I would need to dig deeper into this concern. I would need to touch base with these learners to really dive in and understand if it is a racial issue that makes them feel excluded from the community or if it is something else. And I actually have a real life example for this. So when I was working at my other school district, we were a majority Hispanic school, and we had a small group of Diné students who attended. At the beginning of the year, we looked at their attendance and grades and disciplinary records, and we felt that they were being excluded. And at that time, the big buzzword was linguistics and heritage language models. And so we immediately said, okay, we're going to address inclusivity by embedding heritage into our school through language. And so each class was expected to have little nuggets of Diné in their room and use a word every week, which is great, but it wasn't addressing the problem that we were trying to improve. And what happened was after 6 months, we didn't see any improvement. So we went back to the kids. There were about 7 of the kids who identified with this population. And when we went back to them and really dug deeper by questioning and getting to know their circumstances, we realized they didn't feel excluded because of their Diné identity at all. They felt excluded because they liked anime, skateboarding, they liked agriculture and FFA, and all our district was pushing at the time was athletics. And it was mainly basketball and volleyball, softball and baseball. And so, what we at a very surface level categorized as racial exclusion was actually something that dealt with what all humans have, which is an intersecting identity. So, again, to answer this question in an authentic, meaningful way, I would like to know why these kids feel excluded and then work specifically with that. It could be very detrimental if we do a one size fits all approach with something like this.
Thank you. And so the next question is about MAP scores. And so it says MAP scores show lower achievement and growth in math. What approaches would you use to address this within your broader vision, specifically towards college prep and career and trade pathways?
So, again, I am an analytical thinker. So when I saw the word lower, my brain's asking me like, okay, what is lower? Which populations? What trends are we seeing? I think that it can be, again, very detrimental to a school community when what we do is we look at the big data that says lower, and then we automatically start implementing things to address lower math performance. Because what happens then is we're shifting all systems to the students who are performing at a lower level, and we're losing the leverage we have to accelerate and move forward the students who are in the middle or higher levels of performance. And those kids may actually become disengaged or even regress in the process. So I feel like the first step to address lower MAP scores is to dive into the data, and we have to ask who and what. So who specifically this data relates to. And once we get that information, a proposed suggestion I would make to teachers and the leadership team is how can we then strategically place these students who are lower performing into an enrichment class and leverage that time in enrichment to help address the gaps in their math foundational skills. The next piece is what, and the what would come from backwards planning. We have blueprints that exist, test blueprints for the MAPS test. So we would go through the test, look at skills that are very heavy in the test, and then plan our enrichment to address those skills. I do want to point out that sometimes backwards planning is associated with the word teach to the test. And that we're taught as teachers is supposed to make our stomachs feel really, really bad. But this takes me back to an experience in North Carolina, Wake County, North Carolina, on a Saturday or Sunday. Any cafe in there, you're going to go in and you're going to see students and tutors, whether it's LSATs, MCATs, SAT, ACT, these folks are getting help from tutors and they're studying for the test. Wake County, for those of you who don't know, is one of the top performing districts in North Carolina. It's also the home to some of the richest academic institutions. You have UNC Chapel Hill and Duke in that area. And those schools they're getting high scores on LSATs, MCATs, SATs, all of that. Well, it comes down to them knowing what the test is asking them and them really gaining the test taking skills. But when we translate that into public ed, it's taboo. My rhetorical question to those of you who think it's taboo would be if these kids weren't able to afford these additional tutors, they would be just like our kids. They would need us to step in a public education setting and really help them gain these test preparation skills, test taking skills, and foundational math and English skills. But instead of saying teach to the test, we should think maybe teach with the test, align what we're doing in our enrichment classes with the test and make it fun. It doesn't have to be bland and boring. It can be fun. But I would say I would rather have a sick feeling from implementing a phrase that is made to be taboo than having a sick feeling from knowing I failed kids and they didn't perform to their potential with that math test. I also think, again, if we're sharing the load, we can leverage our math interventionist to support students with the acquisition of those foundational math skills. And perhaps even as a leadership team, divvy up and see how we can dedicate some time to supporting that initiative. And then looking long term, I think the more we recruit elementary school students to enter Taos Academy, the better projection we have with math scores as we're reaching them earlier to address the small gaps that may exist in their learning early on instead of getting them later on and then addressing bigger gaps.
Thank you. And our second to last question is, how would you structure professional development days to balance school-wide training needs, like supporting students with IEPs and 504 plans, with differentiated content-specific PD for teachers?
Yeah, so when I read this question, I interpreted this two ways. The first way was the question asking me how I would prioritize this type of PD. And that, if that was the intent of the question, my response would be, as a leadership team, we would sit down, we would figure what state requirements we need to fulfill to be in compliance. And of course, that PD would be prioritized. And then we would go to our site specific needs and develop PD around that. The second way I interpreted this question was it was asking me, how I would prioritize differentiated content specific PD that specifically targets students on IEPs and 504s. And to address, if that was the intent to address that, I would say that I'm very big on distinguishing, especially in that context, PD versus strategic action. Anyone can attend a PD, but if we really want to leverage what we learn in PD to support student outcomes, then we can't classify it as PD. It has to be a strategic action plan. So that would mean we have the PD, but we also have a plan for implementation and a plan to go in and evaluate those strategies being used in classrooms and a plan to revise and move forward with that action cycle.
Thank you. And so the last question is, will you tell us a little about yourself? Maybe something about your family or what you enjoy outside of work or what work-life balance looks like for you?
Yeah. So for many of you, this is probably the most you have heard from me or about me. I tend to be very private, but I will go into detail so that you all can be as informed as you can about me. I was born and raised in South Africa. I come from a very socioeconomically diverse family. Both maternal and paternal families are from India. My maternal family moved from from India to South Africa with wealth and grew their wealth. Both my grandparents on that side had a formal education. And on my paternal family, my grandparents moved to South Africa very young and were actually indentured servants. So there is a huge disparity in education and wealth. And something I realized very earlier on in life, just watching them navigate life on a daily basis without formal education, is that education really impacts the quality of life. I was born in a time that, was very unique in that apartheid was just over with. And I was able to see some of my older relatives go back to school and have an opportunity to get education and come back. And I saw the physical changes that took place in their homes, where they went from unsustainable living to housing with plumbing and electricity. And just watching that process in totality made me realize that education is something I wanted to be good at, and education was something I value. And that is how my family relates to my core in education. On a less formal note, I do have a daughter, Kaya, a husband, Darrell, and we are a very small family here in Taos, but we do have extended family around the nation. We both belong to sororities and fraternities, and we consider those organizations to be extended family as well. In terms of what I like to do outside of work, I think about work a lot, and things that I engage with because my family likes to do it as well. I guess that would be hiking has been a big one. And just recently, I've become a dance mom. So traveling and learning how to YouTube things to put on makeup and costumes and that's been a big part of our life recently. Um, I think the last part was work-life balance. In full transparency, work-life balance is probably a flaw of mine. It's something that I've been very diligent at working on. Um, I got into administration at the age of 24 and then full-time by the age of 26. And I've always felt the need to have to prove myself because in our field, if you're young, you're considered unknowledgeable and sometimes, quite frankly, incompetent. And that is something I've always felt I have to prioritize work, not embracing a balance. And so, more recently, I have been more considerate about that.
Thank you. And I realized that I skipped a question, so I apologize. I skipped number 5, which was how would you meet, and if you could just speak to this briefly, how would you meet the academic and social needs of Taos Academy's juniors and seniors who are already working, taking college courses, and approaching adulthood?
Again, I think our system does a really good job of supporting these students with a flexible curriculum. But if I had to build upon that system, I would say that perhaps having a discussion around whether we could start their senior portfolio work a little bit earlier, chunking it up, that might be beneficial to them to start their freshman year so it can kind of guide their decisions around what work experiences they want to pursue. Um, and also give them some support with the dual credit classes that they may want to take. Another piece that I thought about when it comes to building on to support seniors and juniors would be creating virtual opportunities for them to engage with socially or even just to meet with a mentor a couple of times so that they have an outlet to speak to someone. A lot of times, with a work schedule and the responsibilities of adulthood, driving and making themselves physically present on campus might hinder them from trying to access those opportunities. And then the final piece would be bragging on them. That may seem simple, but when kids are not on campus, sometimes it's easy to um, find meaningful ways to acknowledge them. And I think we have to be more intentional about making sure we highlight kids like our juniors and seniors who might not be on campus all the time, but are doing great things. This can help them stay engaged in the community and buy into systems. That way, when we're calling them to get work done, there is an understanding that they are valued in our community and we want to see them succeed.
Thank you so much for participating in this question and answer. I think first question and answer ever for Taos Academy. It was really important to the hiring committee that teachers, parents, administration, anyone who wanted to listen to who you are and what your vision is in terms of educational philosophy, were able to hear it before the hiring committee makes a recommendation. So thank you so much for participating. And we invite you to stick around if you have time. The board is going to move into an executive session, but we will come out to make a possible vote. So everyone, if you want to stick around, please do. But with that, we will move on, unless there's anyone on the board that wants to say anything before we move on to the question and answers. I don't think there was any questions, but if that one just popped up. No? Okay, well then we will move on to the next agenda item, which is item H, executive session pursuant to section 10-15-1H2, limited personnel matters related to the hiring of the head administrator for the school year 26-27. It's a presentation of the hiring subcommittee recommendation to the governing council for head administrator. Can I have a motion to move into this executive session, please?
Motion to move into executive session?
I will second. We will need a roll call vote for this, please.
Sam?
Yes.
Laura?
Laura. Oh, we're muted. That's why we can't hear her.
Okay, I see her. Martin?
Yes.
And Karen? Yes. Thanks, Laura.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, the Taos Academy Governing Council is going to reconvene in an open session at 5:49 p.m. I would like to state for the record that all matters discussed during our executive session were limited to the statute identified, which relates to limited personnel matters. There was no action taken during our executive session, and there were no other matters discussed. I would like a roll call, please, to affirm the truthfulness of this statement.
Sam?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
And Karen says yes.
Okay. So next we will move into discussion and possible action resulting from our executive session, which is the conditional offer of employment for the head administrator position for school year 2026-27. I would like to move to conditionally offer Denisha Moodley the position of head administrator at Taos Academy for school year 26-27, pending the satisfactory completion of a background check, ethical misconduct verification, and the negotiation of mutually accepted terms.
Second.
I have a second. May we have a roll call?
Sam?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
And Karen says yes.
That being said, we now have a conditional. We have a conditional offer. We can move forward with a conditional offer.
Yay.
Yay! Is there any discussion now that we've made the motion? Any discussion? Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's it. And our next regular board meeting is scheduled for June 8th, 2026 at 5:30 p.m. And unless there's anything else, I'll call this meeting adjourned at 5:52.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.